It has been sanctioned, neglected, outgunned, and written off more times than anyone can count. It has flown for air forces that couldn't afford to maintain it. It has been exported to nations that could barely keep it in the air. And it fought wars where it was outnumbered, outranged, and outsupported at every turn. Yet it's still here. The Megonian MiG-29 Fulcrum, a machine that was built for one war, survived the collapse of the empire that created it, spread over to 30 countries, and has been in active combat for over 3 decades. Not because it's perfect, but because it is relentless. The MiG-29 is fast enough to chase down almost anything with wings, agile enough that the best pilots in the world walked away from engagements, and some even admitted it scared them. Tough enough to keep showing up on battlefields long after the experts said it was finished. This is the story of the MiG-29 Fulcrum, and it is one of the greatest tales in aviation history. The MiG-29 owes its existence to a single moment of American transparency. In 1969, details of the U.S. Air Force's FX program, the project that would introduce the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle, became public. What those details revealed alarmed Soviet military planners enormously. The F-15 was a heavy, powerful, and very long-range air superiority fighter with a look-down, shoot-down radar, beyond visual range missiles, and performance that would make the Soviet Union's existing frontline jets, such as the MiG-21, MiG-23, and Su-15, look obsolete overnight. The Soviet response was a twin-track development system. Sukhoi would build the heavier, long-range Su-27 flanker. Megonian would build something lighter, cheaper, and designed to operate right at the front lines. The term was Advanced Lightweight Tactical Fighter, which is the idea that it wanted to match the F-15 in close-range turning fight, and it needed to be cheap enough to field in large numbers. The ratio was wanted to be 2 Fulcrums for every 1 flanker, so 2 MiG-29s for 1 Su-27. This design made the design team make several decisive choices. They gave the aircraft 2 engines instead of 1, adding redundancy and raw thrust in a package roughly the same size as the single-engine F-16. They engineered the airframe for extreme high angle of attack performance, blending the wings smoothly into the fuselage using large leading-edge root extensions, which would generate power for vortices, which kept the airplane flying at angles that would stall most Western jets. During development, test pilots discovered the design could actually self-recover from potentially deadly flat spins, a feat that would doom most other airplanes at the time. Another thing they gave the Fulcrum was a powerful NO-19 Rubin pulse Doppler radar, which had a genuine look-down, shoot-down capability. If you don't know what that means, look-down, shoot-down means the radar can look down at lower targets, such as ones flying lower, notice the ground clutter, filter it out, and keep a lock onto the fighter jet if it's flying low. This gave it a tremendous battlefield advantage, especially in the time when many radars struggled from ground clutter. So they also implemented a helmet-mounted targeting system. This was state-of-the-art for the era. It was called the Chanel 3UM. This allowed the pilot to simply look at a target, slave the seeker heads of a short-range missile to it, and fire. This was extremely good with the all-aspect Vampel R-73 Archer missile, which is meant for close-range dogfighting encounters. The MiG-29 could also fire a target just by looking at it without needing to point the nose of the aircraft, which in a dogfight, if the pilot's turning, he just looks up and he can point his head upwards and fire that missile. A huge advantage. And this was also not very common for Western aircraft at the time. When the Western pilots learned about this, it was actually a big fear, and the West went very, very deep into implementing this on their aircraft. One cool fact is that me and this plane actually share a birthday. They both flew on October 6th, except this one flew in 1977. I became alive quite a bit later than that. But anyways, after years of testing and serial production would begin, and the aircraft would enter service with the Soviet Air Force in July of 1983. The design and capabilities. The MiG-29 is a compact twin-engine, single-seat air superiority fighter. It's only 17 meters long and about 11 meters in wingspan, with a maximum takeoff weight of around 18,000 kilograms. That's very, very small. Power comes from 2 Kilimov RD-33 turbofan engines, which each produce roughly 49.4 kilonewtons of dry thrust and 81.4 kilonewtons in full afterburner, which gives this airplane a thrust rate ratio of almost 1-to-1, if not exceeding. In a combat load configuration, maximum speed is approximately around Mach 2.25 at altitude. The air intakes on this plane are very interesting. The air intakes incorporate a design detail that is unique and very important. Retractable mesh screens that come up during operations on rough or unprepared airstrips redirect the airflow through louvers on the upper wing route. This is functionally like a gill. It prevents any kind of ground clutter because back then the Soviet Union had lots of, well, their runways aren't known for being the cleanest of runways. This also opened the potential usability to taking off on roads. If, let's say, the Third World War broke out, many of the runways would be bombed out. They could, in theory, land the MiG-29s on straight roads, and this would lower the chance of FOD, foreign object debris, going into the engines. This was an advantage over Western fighters because Western fighters are designed primarily for prepared runways, and in wartime, nothing ever goes to plan. The primary sensors are the NO-19 radar for beyond visual range engagement. It also has an IRST, infrared search and track system. It is mounted ahead of the cockpit, which, if you know about Russian jets, it's that little circular looking thing right here. It can detect and track the heat signatures of enemy aircraft passively without emitting any radar energy that can be detected. The IRST pretty much gives the MiG-29 the ability to hunt in electronic silence. The armament on this airplane is fantastic. It has a 30mm cannon with 150 rounds of ammo. It also has 6 hardpoints, which hold up to 6 missiles. Typically, pilots ran a combination of R-27 medium-range radar-guided missiles, like the American AM-7 Sparrow. They would also carry the R-73 close-range heat seekers, or like we like to call our AM-9s. Later variants added compatibility with the active radar R-77, which, to think of it, is like the American AM-120 AMRAAM. It also can carry a combination of air-to-ground weapons depending on the role it needs. The cockpit features conventional instrumentation, heads-up display, and that helmet-mounted sight, but one noted weakness. Forward and rearward visibility from the cockpit was consistently criticized by Western pilots who have flown the aircraft. The framing of the canopy and the seat positioning left meaningful blind spots compared to contemporary Western fighter jets like the F-16. Range is another persistent limitation. The base MiG-29 carried an internal fuel for a combat radius of only about a 700-kilometer range, and it lacked an in-air refueling probe that early variants in a NATO conflict scenarios would have. This constrains operational flexibility considerably, which is one of the reasons the Fulcrum is always envisioned as a frontline fighter, not a deep penetration asset. Later variants like the MiG-29S and MiG-29M would address this by adding enlarged fuel tanks and refueling probes to help increase the range. This aircraft is known for its maneuverability. Some people say it's a super maneuverable aircraft, which is a term used for its post-stall characteristics with planes like the Su-30 or the F-22, Su-57. I would not go as far and say it's super maneuverable. It's highly maneuverable. It does not incorporate thrust vectoring, even though a model did, but the main aircraft did not incorporate this. It did have fantastic post-stall characteristics, but made this plane very maneuverable. It was actually more maneuverable than the F-16 in many ways, but it definitely could have still been beaten in a dogfight. It was basically all how the pilot flew it. But the plane did have the advantage in most one-to-one engagements in this situation. Now to what you guys are really here for, the MiG-29's combat debut. It did not come in Eastern Europe, but it happened in the deserts of Iraq. Saddam Hussein's Air Force had received a batch of export standard MiG-29s, Fulcrum A's. By August of 1990, the time of the invasion of Kuwait, the Iraqi Air Force had 37. Notably, Iraq received the downgrade export variant, with R-60MK short-range missiles rather than R-73 and R-27 Tangos. Western intelligence actually thought they had these and considered these extremely high threats. Iraq was very dissatisfied they didn't get this, and they actually ordered no further aircraft because of this. When Operation Desert Storm began on January 17, 1991, the MiG-29 met the F-15 in combat for the first time. On the opening night of the war, U.S. Air Force F-16Cs from the 33rd Fighter Wing were sweeping for Iraqi fighters, when one of them, flown by Captain John Kelp, detected a contact 35 miles on radar. The contact locked onto Kelp. He launched his AM-7 Sparrow, performed evasive maneuvers, and at 10 miles observed a flash of light. Intelligence confirmed this kill an Iraqi MiG-29 was shot down. Kelk became the first American pilot credited with an aerial victory in the F-15 and the first to take down a MiG-29. The pattern repeated over the next 2 days. On January 17th, 3 F-15s from the 33rd Flight Wing shot down 3 more MiG-29s. The following day, January 18th, the same unit downed 2 more. In total, 5 MiG-29s were shot down by U.S. Air Force F-15s during the Gulf War, with no F-15 shot down. There was, however, 1 MiG-29 that landed a blow. On January 19th, Iraqi pilot Jamil Syed single-handedly attacked a formation of British Tornado jets in his MiG-29 and shot one down with his R-60. Before being intercepted and shot down himself by other F-15s, British sources have long disputed this claim, though it is acknowledged in multiple combat records in my source, the Military Watch magazine, which I'll put up here. So it probably happened. The Gulf War MiG-29s were hampered by the same structural disadvantage that would shadow the aircraft throughout its entire combat career. No airborne early warning support. Degraded export variant models, and honestly a lack of training time, gave the MiG-29 just not a fair shot. Especially going against the American F-15s that were supported by the E-3 AWACS, they stood almost no chance. Even though both aircraft were very, very close, 95% of American kills are achieved with the support of an airborne early warning radar. The MiG-29 did not get beat by a better fighter, it was just beat by a better system. Iraq's original fleet of 37 MiG-29s was reduced to 12 after the Gulf War. 9 Iraqi MiG-29s were flown to Iran for safekeeping during the conflict, and Iran just confiscated them. So Iran technically has old Iraqi MiG-29s. Then the Eritrean-Ethiopian War of 1998-2000, which was a very brutal border conflict between these two nations. It produced one of the more unusual air wars of the post-Cold War era. Both sides went shopping. Eritrea bought 8 MiG-29A fighter jets and 2 MiG-29UBs. Ethiopia, the more economically advanced of the two, could afford the more powerful Sukhoi 27. And eventually, on the 21st of February 1999, 2 Eritrean aircraft attempted to ambush a singular Sukhoi 27. However, the Su-27 detected the threat, evaded, turned back, and actually took out 1 MiG-29 in the dogfight. The engagements that followed were tactically fascinating. The Australian pilots, trained rapidly by Ukrainian instructors, tried to use the MiG-29's superior close-range ability and the R-73 missile to close the distance and negate the flankers' longer-range advantage. Practice would then show the actual firing range of the R-27s were a lot less than that was advertised. Ethiopian Su-27 pilots had a time advantage of only 1 to 2 seconds instead of the 5 to 7 claimed by the manufacturer. The margins were razor thin, and this meant the actual distance between these two airplanes was not as great as many thought. But the outcome was still poor for the MiG-29. The air battle left the Eritrean Air Force with just 2 operational combat MiG-29s of the 10, and only 2 qualified pilots. The Ethiopians would then gain air supremacy, and the sources are kind of conflicting with each other on how many were shot down, so I will not give a number. But the Eritrean-Ethiopian War remains one of the very few instances of 2 post-Soviet 4th-generation fighters engaging in genuine air combat. However, it kind of demonstrated a strange thing. They had less pilots than they had airplanes, so once again the MiG-29 still had a horrible, horrible situation to fight in. And even with this mining the edge that the Su-27 had, the Ukrainian armed forces would take a massive look into this and would then change their doctrine, knowing the mistakes they discovered. And the Ukrainians would eventually learn in real time what this plane was capable of. I will fast forward. There were 2 instances. The Kosovo War I could get into, but the video is getting a little longer. We could also mention how the West would actually buy some MiG-29s to prevent Iran from getting some, and we did our own tests on them, and we mainly use, the United States, using for aggressor training. But I really want to get into the war in Ukraine. Ukraine, as we all know, operates MiG-29s. In fact, it's the backbone of the Ukrainian Air Force. It was the only jet Ukrainian pilots could fly immediately without retraining. There was no time to learn new aircraft. The Falkland was what they had, so the Fulcrum is what they flew. And on February 24th, 2022, they entered the war with about 50 operational MiG-29s, the largest single fighter type in its inventory, which was inherited from the Soviet Union in 1991. It would be maintained imperfectly, however, and the situational readiness of this was not well, is well known. Those first few weeks of punishing fighting, the Ukrainian MiG-29s were flying into one of the most sophisticated air defense environments in the world. Russian S-400s and S-300 batteries with engagement ranges that the medium and high altitude operational suicidal Ukrainian pilots had to adapt to. They would fly extremely low and fast to stay under the radar coverage of Russian air defenses. Using terrain masking to survive, the tactics were risky, exhausting, but occasionally brilliant. They would often get some results, but the losses did stack up. And the ground situation was equally as dangerous. Russian Iskander ballistic missile and drone reconnaissance was used to find and strike Ukrainian air bases. Over a 10-day period in October of 2023 alone, Russia shot down 17 MiG-29s, a single stretch of fighting that illustrated just how ferocious the attrition rate had become. According to the Oryx open source tracking group, Ukraine had lost around 33 MiG-29s. They were confirmed destroyed at the start of the full-scale invasion. The actual number is almost certainly higher. But here is where the resilience, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, comes in. Ukraine's allies would step in. Slovakia would transfer 13 29s to Ukraine. Poland transferred 14, becoming the first NATO member to supply Ukraine with a fighter aircraft. When it sent the first 4 in March 2023 in total, Poland and Slovakia donated an estimated 33 MiG-29s. This supplemented the over 50 Ukraine already operated, which had actually given them a bit of surplus from the beginning of the war. And as early as 2026, Poland is in advanced negotiations to transfer its remaining 14 MiG-29s, its entire last stock, to Ukraine. The Polish Air Force is retiring the type entirely, replacing it with F-16s and F-A-50 light combat aircraft developed from South Korea. In return, Ukraine will provide Poland with its drone and missile technology and doctrine. A technology exchange that reflects just how much both countries have learned from the last 4 years of war. But despite everything, the losses that the constant Russian targeting of the air bases caused a massive attrition in the Ukrainian Air Force. But still, despite everything, the losses, the constant bombardments, Ukraine is believed to have around 40 MiG-29s across 3 aviation brigades, making it still their most numerous fighter type. The Fulcrum had also taken on newer roles. It was never designed for originally. The MiG-29s have been adapted to carry and launch American AGM-88 HARM. These are anti-radiation missiles. Basically what they do is they will detect radiation from let's say a Russian S-300 site, follow that radiation down, and end up hitting the ground, the surface air missile sites. It's anti-SAM missiles, what this is, and it's called HARM. Basically, Ukraine improvised the integration, and they attached to their MiG-29s. It was kind of a miracle done, and multiple American companies were also with this, but they did use it for suppression of enemy air defense roles. It is also worth pursuing the last point. A jet designed in the 1970s to defeat NATO fighters over the plains Central Europe is now being used to shoot down Russian cruise missiles over Ukrainian cities. Its pilots fly knowing that Russian Su-35s, a far more capable, far better equipped airplane, is hunting them down every single day. But they still do it anyways. The MiG-29 Fulcrum is simply a resilient fighter. It's not the best. It never has been the best. It's got its strengths, but it has many weaknesses. However, despite all of this, it still flies combat missions. It is one of the most iconic jets in history, and if you want to ask me my opinion, it has always been my favorite jet growing up. I have multiple models of this plane. I've always had an obsession with it. And that's it. Over 1,600 of these airplanes were made. Many more variants I could have got into, but this video is almost 20 minutes. I just want a general overview of this plane. The MiG-29, a jet made in the Cold War. Russia's first big 4th generation fighter, designed for frontline combat, and it definitely got it. While its record is pretty poor, it's still one of the most cunning and fascinating planes to have ever flown, and in my opinion, it might be the most resilient. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please subscribe. Comment what you think. Tell me what you think about the MiG-29. Was it a success? Is it a failure? Or is it still being determined? That's it. Hope you guys have a great night, and goodbye.